So I'm going to start the YouTube. Just a second, guys. I'll be back with you. Okay, so we're live on YouTube as well. Hello, people on YouTube. If you are watching it on YouTube, there is a link in the description. You can join us on Zoom. It would be great to see you here, and you can join the chat as well. We're going to be monitoring the chat on YouTube, but if you can join us, there's a link in the description. Guys, mute yourself. Let's see. Who's unmuted? Daphne. Okay, so I disabled the waiting room. So let me just kind of get to know each other. We're going to talk for the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to start the show. I'm going to see if there's a camera on. I'll talk to you. Boris. Hey, Boris. Where are you from?
I'm in Baltimore.
Baltimore. What time is it?
It's 11:47 a.m.
11:47. So good morning there. I'm in Tel Aviv. My name is Avi, by the way. It says UX Salon there. I'm going to change it later. But how did you get to find this event?
God, I'm a fan of Cheryl. I'm not sure. I saw it somewhere on the internet.
Okay.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Boris. Thank you for joining.
Reading your book. That's so far really good.
Oh, cool. So looking forward to the discussion after. Who else is here? Deborah LaLouche. Hey, Deborah.
Hi.
Where are you from?
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Same time zone as Boris.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, I'm surprised that people from across. I'm often thinking the people from Europe, kind of joining in the evening time. That people are in the morning. So, how did you find about this event? What do you do?
I'm also somewhat, I guess, a fan of Cheryl's. I've actually found some of her stuff via some TikTok communities, and I got her book for Christmas, and so I've been working my way through it.
Wow.
Well, hi, cool. Deborah. Hello from TikTok.
Yeah, hi.
Cheryl, are you on TikTok?
I am. Yeah.
We gotta talk. I don't know.
So you have to look at me for me on the app.
Okay. So I gotta join TikTok. It seems like there's something happening there.
Yeah, folks can find me as Funny Godmother on the app.
Oh, okay. So let's talk to Krishma Pasali. Sorry, I can't say your name. But
Krishma Patil.
Oh, hi. So
hi.
Where are you from?
I'm from Clemson, South Carolina.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's the same time zone.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
It's really hot outside, I mean.
That's cool. So what do you do?
So I'm a grad student. I study industrial engineering, and my specialization is human factors. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm transitioning into UX slowly.
Okay. So great that you joined us. One more guy, maybe to talk to Daniel. Mac, yes, you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. You're hitting the whole Eastern time zone. I'm actually in Bloomington, Indiana, at the Indiana University. And hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Daniel.
Know each other?
I'm a longtime fan of Cheryl's.
Wow.
We actually, I mean, without getting into it too deeply, but we have a game developer conference history, for lack of other things, and a surprise meeting at the Seattle Film Festival back in 2000.
Yes, back outside
very
the
cool.
That's so
anyway,
cool.
I'm an educator working at the Indiana University. I have a media designer for the marketing department of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Okay, well, great to have you here.
Krishma, I wanted to say welcome to the field and good luck on your studies.
Oh, and I should also say that I'm also looking to go back to graduate school for UX specifically, because that was part of my undergrad too. That's one of the reasons we started talking. Is that was like back in the day, that was my undergrad. But now I'm thinking about going back and getting a second master's. And the informatics school here, it's really big. So I'll show
I
it.
feel if anyone else here is starting it there or getting into the field, it seems that that's a very hot. A lot of companies are looking for people who work to come and work for them. So good luck. So again, so one more. Who is here from Europe? Who says? Who's, let's see.
Me.
Patrick. Who's that? Tatiana.
Yeah, Patrick as well.
And Patrick.
Yeah,
I'm in
from
Lisbon.
Europe.
Where are you
And
from?
Pavel here
Tatiana?
as well.
Who said what?
I'm Pavel.
Tatiana.
I'm also from Europe, Warsaw, Poland.
Oh, Poland. Okay. Good to have you here.
I'm in UK as well.
Who's that?
It's Ilaria over here.
Oh, Larry, hey. So I'm sorry, there's so many faces, I can't really look at everyone, but I'm noticing you.
Hello, Ilaria. Hello, Powell. Hello, Tatiana.
And hello, Patrick. So what we'll do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how UX Salon is if you haven't been to UX Salon event before. UX Salon is basically, the word salon means a living room in many languages. And the idea behind it is that we will have a talk by Cheryl in a few minutes. And I'd love for you guys to stay after, and then we'll have like a salon discussion. It's a very casual discussion. You guys can answer questions or ask questions or give your comments or share your perspectives into what was discussed. And it's going to be productive, hopefully, homely kind of feeling to it. And perhaps if we will have time, we will also do some breakout rooms where we get to network. So I'm going to break out rooms to 5 people in a room. And like if you walk into a conference, as we used to do, you just see a group of people, you say, hey, how you doing? You get to know people. It's random, right? So I'm going to try to do that as well. So maybe perhaps you can meet a colleague, a friend. It's good to network a little bit, do a digital version of it from across the world. So that's something fun. And I want to ask you, because as this is an online event, it used to be that we went out to these meetups and events, and we got dressed up, we drove the car, parked the car, went into the hall, sat down, and then we listened to the talk, and at the end a few questions, and it's over. But I think that the magic of having an online event is that actually we can interact with each other. We can chat as we go along. It doesn't have to be at the end. And I think that the magic of these events, when I see people chatting, and if someone is asking a question, people answer it. And if Cheryl is going to mention something, and people paste a link or any relevant information about it. So it's cool. I want to encourage that. Do that as much as you can. I think that's the fun of having a live event and not watching it later on YouTube, because if you say I watch it later on YouTube, it's often postponed, and sometimes you just watch the first 5 minutes, you skip, and you don't really enjoy the full grasp of the whole event. And in that sense, also, I would ask, turn off your phones, that don't have any distractions. Just be here with us. Allow yourself the next hour to kind of learn. Also, to celebrate this digital format, we created a shared Google Doc where if you're writing notes, why not share it with everyone? Why not write it there so we can see your notes? Because there's a lot of learning. Everyone learns something else. If we can all share the notes, then we can get other perspectives. That's going to be fun. So Daphne is helping me today. Hi, Daphne. Where are you? Hey. So we just pasted the Google Doc. So if you want to write some notes, add your notes later, or want to see other people's notes, join that. Also, we have a networking sheet. That's going to be it's going to be a Google Sheets, right, Daphne? Yeah. So if you want to get to know people, if you're looking for a job, if you're looking to hire, at the end, if we're going to do the breakout rooms, if you want to find someone, that's a great way to do that. So add yourself to that Google Sheet. Also, I think killing minutes here before we start. I'm going to start exactly on the dot at the beginning of the hour. So 4 more minutes. Follow UX Salon on Instagram, because I tend to share a lot of cool things there, a lot of interesting, fun learning. So if you can, take out your phone, look for UX Salon on Instagram and follow it. Soon to be a TikTok channel. And also on LinkedIn. we have a lot of cool things sharing there. So that way you can get to know what's the next events, and we're planning a few cool next events this year. So that's it. Let me just start the recording. Make it official. Record in the cloud. Yes. Okay. So I will speak to one more or two people just before we begin. Who else I didn't speak to? Andy. Hi, Andy. How you doing?
Hello.
Where are you from?
Well, I'm from Toronto.
Toronto.
And, I'm an instructional designer, but I'm really interested in UX and kind of try to bring a UX focus to my work.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm going to come to Toronto hopefully in August.
Awesome.
So I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Hopefully we'll be all opened up by then.
Oh, yes, I hope so too. I'm here in Tel Aviv, and it's quite open. You know, the vaccine did its work.
Yeah, I know you guys were like really ahead of the game, so congrats on
everything. It seems like, I don't know, and knock on wood, it seems like everything is really opening and there's no need for masks anymore, and I don't know. So hopefully it will continue like this. So maybe I'll see you in Toronto.
Awesome.
Who else is here? Paula. Hey, where are you from? You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself so we can hear you. Nope, nope. For some reason. Nope, she's, oh. No, it doesn't work. Okay.
Oh, bummer.
Bummer. Sorry about that. Okay, so JB. Hey.
There it is. Hi.
Okay. How you doing? Where are you from?
I'm good. I'm in Seattle, so a few hours earlier than the folks on the East Coast we talked to earlier.
So what time is it?
It is 8:58 a.m.
Okay, so you're in
Hello,
the same
fellow
time.
Seattleite.
So you're the same time zone with Cheryl. Good morning to you. That's quite early to get up for this kind of stuff. That's quite a dedication.
You know, we get so little sun so early in Seattle that when it happens, my body's like, yay, and I just wake up. It's weird.
We're pretty north, so the sun's coming up at like 6 in the morning right now.
Okay. Well, okay. I think that's so. We'll wait to the end for more networking and getting to know more people. It was fun. Cheryl, the floor is yours. I'm really looking forward to this. We spoke like a few months ago, and I was like, oh yeah, we got to get this going. So welcome to share. Oh, here's the networking sheet. It's people already using it, as I can see on your screen. But you're welcome to share your screen and start the show.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's really fun to meet folks from so many different time zones. And if for those of you who might have just come in or taken a chance or come to all the UX Salon events and haven't met me before, hello, my name is Cheryl Platz. I am the owner of a company called Ideation, and I am here to talk to you today about some concepts at the final frontier of design. We are designing products at the final frontier, and you probably are too. You're just not necessarily thinking of it in that way. I know a lot of designers think maybe they're just working on websites or they're just working on phone experiences. But when we take a step back from the devices that we're working on and we think about our customers' experience from end to end, it turns out that there's a lot more than meets the eye. Your customer has 5 senses and a small universe of devices. So why aren't we designing for all of those things? It's not as hard as it sounds. It is challenging, which is why I wrote a book about it. But it's not as far off and as crazy as it seems. And I'm here to help you start thinking about that. And I'm excited to start that conversation with you this insert time of day for you. So if you're not familiar with me and my work, I'm the author of a book called Design Beyond Devices. And some of the things that I've worked on, which may help inform the types of questions you ask me later when we get to the salon portion of the discussion. And speaking of, I'm just gonna make sure my chat's open because as mentioned, people may just ask questions in chat. I may not see all of them, but I am a Twitch streamer, so I'm comfortable seeing chat during talks. So if I do see something, I may pull it out during the talk. But some of the things I've worked on, I was the original user experience designer on the Echo Look team at Amazon, which was a fashion camera with Alexa enabled over there at Amazon. And I was the original designer on the Alexa notifications framework. I've done voice systems and multimodal design for a ton of stuff, including Alexa, Cortana, Windows Automotive, Dynamics Power Virtual Agents. I shipped one of the first speech-enabled Nintendo DS games called Disney Friends, and I've created several Alexa skills. So, and that's in addition to like more traditional stuff, like being design lead for Azure. So I've thought a lot about how we work on non-traditional experiences and how we take our traditional design skills and translate them to these non-traditional ways of interacting with our devices. And that's what we're talking about today. So, you know, this is the book, but we're just going to move right in. So what I want to talk to you about today are some of the core concepts. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of definitions. I'm going to talk to you about 4 themes from the book that kind of cut through all of multimodal design, and we'll define what that is. I'm going to talk to you about the spectrum of multimodality, which is a series of interaction models that kind of span the industry. And I'm going to talk to you about kind of how the design process shakes out when you're working on these experiences that span multiple ways of interacting with a single system. So let's start with some definitions. Words matter, and it makes a difference to make sure we're all talking about the same things. So the website has been declared dead many times already, and yet the web still lives. We're interacting with it right now on our sheet, our networking sheet, and our UX Night notes sheet right now. But it lives on many devices and via many forms of interaction. And what waits to replace this dearly departed website? If we were to honor the pundits, if we were to honor their breathless prognostications and accept that the website is dying. In 2016, they were telling us, join the mobile first revolution, it's mobile first all the way. And then just a year later, you'd get whiplash because suddenly it was all voice first all the time. And we were abandoning mobile first to talk about voice first. And, you know, in 2021, we can look back and see that neither of those things is really true. We both have our mobile phones with us all the time, but our smart speakers are also a big part of our lives if we have them. The context is what matters. We didn't abandon either of those things. And that's really the lesson I want us to take away from this first part is our natural instinct to seek a winner or a winning way of interacting with the system is missing the point. There is no one true interface. And most of the devices your customers are using are multimodal. We're having a multimodal interaction right now. I am interacting with you with multiple modes of communication. You're using your eyes to take in visual communication from both my video and like my actual video and my slides, and you're hearing me talk. That's a multimodal interaction. Happens all the time. And this device is also capable of taking voice input from me if I wanted to deal with Cortana. And it's sad that I don't because I worked on her, but we don't have time to unpack that right now. So we're going to move on. The future is multimodal because humans are multimodal. A mode in this context of this conversation is a type of communication. And humans communicate using their senses. Now, I don't mean that I like communicate using my eyes. I mean, yes, Tyra Banks and America's Top Model talks about smiling with your eyes, but what I actually mean is we take in communication using our senses. So you project communication in a way that I can take in using my eyes or my sense of touch or my ears, for example, my sense of hearing. A multimodal interaction is an exchange between a device and a human being. Could also be human to human, but for the UX salon community, let's say device and human being, where multiple input or output modalities can be used simultaneously or sequentially, depending on context and preference. It's not just about what you need to do, it's about what you may want to do in the moment. So let's talk about communication modalities for a second to make sure we're all on the same page. Some of them are very rote. Some of them we all know by heart, right? You know, we have eyes, and many of us have the benefit of using those eyes. And so visual communication is stuff that we can take in using our eyes, usually a static image. It could be text. It could be a picture. Auditory communication, the use of acoustic waves to communicate meaning, which could be speech, but could also be music or a sound effect. Haptic communication is communicating meaning with changes to the physical environment, which is, you know, pressure, vibration, force feedback, or direct manipulation like touch or clicks, so taps or clicks. So I'm, you know, my mouse. The last two are a little bit less trivial. So kinetic communication is communication based on movement or orientation in space. This is where we get to things like gesture and presence. So our long beloved and then departed and then sort of not departed Xbox Kinect is kinetic communication. You might argue that animated GIFs are kinetic communication because if you just pause them, that's not the meaning there. Like when you turn them off and you just pause them, that you don't get what the person was trying to communicate. And to the question there, I do make the slides available afterwards, and the content is all covered in the book. So yes and yes. So the last category of communication here is very non-trivial because I don't see a lot of people talking about this category, but I call it ambient communication. But I refer to it as inferred meaning driven by environmental or biometric conditions. So this form of communication is interesting because it's kind of delayed. You express your intent to the system at some point in the past. You know, you said, with your Nest, you said, hey, when I leave the house, turn the system off. And it turns off when you leave. Or, you know, more specifically, like you tell your watch, yes, when my heart rate goes too high for more than like 10 minutes when I'm sitting down, let me know because I might be having a heart attack. That's an ambient interaction. Like I didn't intentionally do anything in the moment to get that notification, but I gave my device permission at some other point to have that interaction. But in the moment, it's ambient. There are, you know, you might have told a device at some point, hey, when it gets really cold, turn the lights to blue because I love sort of atmospheric lighting. Those are ambient interactions. Also scent-based interaction, but you get that in Vegas a lot. They love to interact with your mind based on scent. Notice that the next time you go, what perfumes they're attacking you with if you ever go to Vegas or a casino or something like that. Very intentional choices. So what is multimodal design? I define it as multimodal design seeks to coordinate the delivery of multiple input and output stimuli to create a flexible, coherent experience for our customers. Like I mentioned, we're having a multimodal experience right now. And your device has the capability to do this all the time, but are we doing it intentionally? Are we doing it to include more people? Are we doing it to extend the capabilities of our experience? That's multimodal design when we're doing that intentionally. And the practice of multimodal design is an additional layer of design rigor added on top of our existing modality-specific designs, like voice UI design or graphical UI design. I'm not here to tell you that what I'm about to teach you replaces what we have. It's more complexity. And so job security, yay. And not every designer will engage at this level necessarily. I kind of view this as another framework like some of the mobile stuff we work on that not everybody will have to think about all the time, but for the first couple years especially, we're all going to need to kind of think about it consciously because we won't have figured out all the messy bits. You're still going to need to do those full voice UI designs or those full graphical user interface designs. This is just one more layer to think about, which is why I wrote the book. Because you know what? Even when I was at Amazon, we didn't really have time to have some of these big, complicated conversations. We had to have them, but it was super stressful and it was hard to have them at the right layer of granularity. And I can only imagine what a smaller team would do, how stressful that would be when you're trying to resolve all these questions and you still have to do voice designs and graphical user interface designs. So hopefully this can help give you a jump start. So hopefully we're all talking about the same things now, and we can switch gears to talking about the themes in the book, the 4 categories of concepts I feel that multimodal designers really need to know about. Yes, Amy, someone leaving the stove on too long is another example of like an ambient interaction. Like, yes, please turn the stove off if I've left it on too long. You gave it permission before, and using a sensor, it turned that off for you. So one note I wanted to make before we dive down this path is, in the subtitle of my book, I talk about creating multimodal and cross-device experiences, which is one of the reasons I'm so confident that everybody in this room is going to get something out of this talk. But, I think one of the questions that my patient publisher, Lou, probably would have asked me at one point would be like, well, why both? Isn't it complicated enough just to talk about multimodality? And to me, it was impossible to separate them, because it's short-sighted to assume any experience exists in a vacuum, like our customers are swimming in devices. Even websites are cross-device now, right? Like most websites function on desktop and mobile, which means like a lot of the things we have to resolve for dealing with a multimodal device, like context and notifications and interruption, are relevant for cross-device experiences too. And one of the reasons people are going to switch devices is because they want to move to a different mode of communication. Like you move from your desktop to your smart speaker because you want to talk to it, or you move from your smart speaker to your desktop because you need to type a lot and you don't want to talk to the device anymore. And so they're kind of intertwined. To me, it's hard to pull these 2 concepts apart. So to me, the book can be divided into 4 themes, and they're interwoven. It's not neat like 4 sections, but each chapter fits into 1 or 2 of these core themes. It's customer context and ethics, multimodal frameworks that help you sort of process what's available and what your customer is going to need, and start to communicate what's unique about your system. Ideation and execution, so techniques for documenting your work, techniques for creating design systems, and then emerging technology, a landscape of what's available, what's coming, and what's unique about the technologies we have. In the emerging technology categories, where we talk about a lot of things like bias, inclusion and exclusion, working with disabilities and things along those lines, because when we start to work with new technologies, that's often where we encounter the most risk and the most opportunity when dealing with concepts like inclusion and bias. So let's briefly preview the content from each of the themes. I'm not going to go super into detail on each of the chapters, but I can give you a lay of the land, and then I'm going to go into detail on 1 or 2 of the concepts I think are the most critical in the book, so that you have something you can take away here. So, we've got some fire today. So, I don't know why it's so enthusiastic about moving. We'll just look at this slide on its own. So theme 1, customer context and ethics. So there's 4 of the chapters I wanted to highlight here. I felt it was very important because a lot of the experiences we're designing that are multimodal have the ability to impact people on a deeper, more emotional level, especially voice interfaces, because our brains process them in the same way we process conversations with real humans. There's bigger ethical considerations. We're also dealing with AI in almost every situation, computer vision, natural language interfaces. So we're dealing with bias, we're dealing with exclusion. And so it was really important to me that the whole book deal with ethics as kind of a fundamental concept, not just sort of a side concept. So the book is bookended with key concepts like disability and inclusive design, anti-racism, anti-neutrality, but also like active frameworks you can use, including a somewhat pithily named framework called PICS, or It Shouldn't Happen, which talks about problem, inclusion, change, and systems, something you can use to query an idea you have to figure out whether or not you should build it, or what the problems might be if you do. I also talk about a concept called optopessimism in a different chapter we're going to talk about a little bit later, which could also be viewed as something that helps you query ethical impacts. But customer context is super important when we talk about multimodality, because the reason people are choosing to move between devices or modalities is because something in their environment has changed, or it is influencing them in some way. And the only way we can understand those conditions is if we really dig into our customer's context. So I have a whole chapter on enhancing your customer research with an improv-inspired framework to get an extra level of detail. Because the assumptions we used to make about the way a house was laid out, the way an office was laid out, aren't detailed enough for what we need when designing multimodal experiences. And when I was designing these things, I know I had to defend my experiences to stakeholders who were like, well, why don't we just use a mobile phone? Why are we using a smart speaker for this? In many cases, smart speakers were dealing with scenarios you could do on a mobile phone. The only thing that made the Echo interesting was that they did it in a different way, in an interesting context. You could create a kitchen timer on a mobile phone. The interesting thing was you didn't have to use your hands, and the context was people's hands were messy. Right? You're working on, your hands are covered in butter. You don't want to touch the phone. In fact, you don't want your phone near the kitchen in some cases. And so that context matters. And that's why it's so important to dig into customer context. And that chapter, Understanding Busy Humans, is about taking that context and translating it into patterns, which you can then try to represent in code in the hopes that we can teach our machines an etiquette framework, because our machines are terribly rude when they interrupt us. How many times has your computer interrupted you in the middle of typing a sentence? It should know you're typing a sentence. It has access to your keyboard and your screen. It knows what you are doing, but it doesn't care because we didn't bother to tell it that you're busy when you are typing a sentence. And that's what that, so that's what I mean when I talk about context. Oh no, if you do have one of those Amazon devices on, you may want to mute it. I might mention that word a couple more times. Nathan, that's fine. Yeah, and then your family's having a family member's name who is Alexa. That is a whole other ethical question. That's one of those things where examining the potential impact of one of your choices, there's a whole group of people who are whose family members' names are Alexa, who are like trying to push Amazon to change the device's name. Whether or not that will be successful, you know, when I talk about that, like that Pixar, it shouldn't happen framework, like the impact you're going to have on a system and on people, was that considered? Was what about people who actually have those names? How deeply was that considered, and what choices were what trade-offs were made in that room? I was not there for those choices, but those are the kinds of questions you need to ask yourself as a product designer, because your product decisions could end up impacting someone named Alexa on a day-to-day basis for the rest of their lives. And Siri, yeah. Luckily, no one's named OK Google, to the best of my knowledge, so at least that's not a problem. So theme number 2 is multimodal frameworks. So tools for understanding and representing what's unique about your system, and turning that into patterns so that your system can be predictable, it can be represented in code, and you can build something that fits within the larger set of experiences on the market. So there's some new concepts here, like an interruption matrix, which I'll talk about in a second. There's a whole chapter on proactivity and the spectrum of ways you might interrupt a customer, not just notifications, but nudges and badges, and understanding the full spectrum of those things so that you aren't reinventing the wheel every time you interrupt a customer, and so that you are doing so in a way that aligns with all the other options out there. I have designed a lot of notification systems in my day, and the patterns really, it's both, there are a lot of patterns that apply, and it's always a heavy lift to design a notification system, because the types of notifications and the specific notifications in each system are very different, but the patterns still apply across systems. there's also a part of one chapter goes into how to extend atomic design, the framework from Brad Frost, to use it for multimodal design. And there's actually a whole interview with Brad where I sat down and we talked about my proposal for how to extend that model for multimodal design. So if you are building a really big multimodal framework, there's guidance on how you might take that and move it into a full design system. And then the spectrum of multimodality, which helps you decide what interaction model makes the most sense for a device that can communicate with people in multiple ways. We're going to talk about that in more detail a bit later. So an interruption matrix helps you understand all the different things a system can do and all the different things that can interrupt the things a system can do. When I first started working on the Echo, I needed to design notifications. They gave me an Excel sheet with a literal list of every single thing the Echo could do, mapped against every single thing the Echo could do. And there was a unique cell for all of those intersections. And they were like, okay, now we have more activities. And also we're adding the Echo Show. So we need to figure out what happens with screens. It's like, that's not going to scale. We need to figure something else out. And so I talk about the process of turning that into patterns. And then turning that whole thing into a more concise interruption matrix where we can create repeatable patterns. We can say, here's some common types of activities that share common patterns in our system. And here's what happens when we interrupt them in certain ways. And then each cell in a matrix, when we map those two things together, becomes a design exercise. So this is a reenactment of the interruption matrix I had to put together for Alexa notifications. And it was a big design lift, but that process taught me so much about the kind of thing you'd have to do on large systems. And there are so many little design choices in this table. What we wanted, is it a banner? Is it a badge? Are we showing sounds or are we speaking in the moment? Are we pausing an experience or are we canceling it? So much design possibility here. So there's 2 whole chapters on this kind of this ramp. And then we have the spectrum of multimodality, a roadmap to determining what multimodal interaction model makes most sense for your customers based on their context. And you can see I've mapped in these quadrants some of the experiences we have today. Like Echo Show is up on the adaptive quadrant, which is super flexible, versus a Fitbit or a HoloLens is on the direct side, which is not super flexible. And I'm going to explain what this matrix means in more detail a little bit later. So we're going to put a pin in this and we're going to come back and I'm going to give you a lot more detail. So stay tuned and we'll give you more than just a passing reference on that. Our third theme is ideation and execution. So how do you take these frameworks and then start working on your actual designs? I talk about multimodal traps, like how difficult it is to deal with identity, especially with systems like gesture, where a tall person's gestures are going to be different than a short person's gestures because their skeletons are different. And those difficult patterns, an experienced multimodal designer is going to know to ask those questions up front. And so I want to help you ask those questions up front so that you don't get hit by those problems like 6 months down the line on your projects. So we talk about those multimodal traps. We talk about transitions. So you as a designer have been specialized in working on one specific design, you're working for the mobile phone, you're working on those designs, and you haven't really, some of you may have been working on transitions between devices, but most likely we've been focused on individual experiences and the transitions have been kind of falling through the cracks. So there's a whole chapter talking about how to shine light on those cracks. What types of transitions are there? Which ones are most problematic? And it's not just between devices, it's between modalities, it's between network connections. There's a bunch of different transition patterns that cause problems in this world where we're looking beyond the borders of a single device. And considering those is going to make your experience so much more robust. And even just thinking about network connection transitions, even if you're only working on a mobile phone, Outlook used to be so bad at this. You would open the Outlook app, and then it would say, "There's nothing in your inbox" when you had when you had airplane mode on. There were things in my inbox, it just couldn't see them. All I had to do was check to see that airplane mode was on and then say, "We can't get to your inbox right now." But instead you had this heart attack because you might not remember that you had airplane mode on. Or you might not know that you had lost internet connection. You see there's nothing in your inbox and you think, "I've been fired, my mailbox has been deleted, what has happened?" So those transitions make a difference. And so this whole chapter on that. And then these last two concepts down here, it's hard to start from a blank page. Take it from me. I've worked from several of them. So a bunch of techniques, at least one person's like, "I will take no email, thank you." So that's fair. Yeah, that maybe feature, not bug. But so these last two chapters there are ideas for techniques to help you breathe life into these big ideas. Because even if you can see the vision for your big, cool, multimodal cross-device experience, your stakeholders are probably like, "Wow, that's expensive. I don't know about that." And it's going to land on us to tell the story of your customer context, to get it out of your research and into their heads. And you're probably going to need a storyboard. If you're working on an experience that takes up 3D space, you're probably going to need to body storm or do some form of diorama or prototype to figure out what your relationship with that 3D space is. You're going to need to me, you also need to explore the potential ramifications of success and failure on your proposed project, which is what the Optipessimism framework is all about, challenge framework with a bunch of questions that help you explore hypothetically what your idea might mean down the line. And then I talk a lot about how to turn your multimodal experiences into tangible flows that you can hand to your development partners, which they will love you for. So that's especially for those transitions, to document what those look like. And yeah, Body Storm could be an awesome band name. That's true. There has to be a band named Body Storm. There has to be. So this is a rough example, super sort of condensed because it had to fit inside a tiny book page, but an example of like what a multimodal swim lane sketch might look like for a scenario for a smartwatch airport transfer. So an airport transfer was a thing that happened in airports where you would land and then you would want to get from the airport to like a hotel, and you might need some form of transportation to do so. And so in this case, we're saying this person has a phone and a smartwatch, and they are and the smartwatch is capable of using voice, and it has a little dial and it has touch, and you can use the smartwatch to communicate with the app that can arrange the transfer. And so here we've got input column swim lanes on the top, output swim lanes on the bottom, and the system in the middle. We talk about how this diagram shows a few different ways a customer can transition between inputs and what output impacts that has, and why we might want to capture this moment in time and share it with our development partners. Now, this is a small example. You can have much larger examples, and there's some judgment calls in what you decide to show and not show. But this is one example of how you might start to think about making some of your multimodal flows tangible, in addition to like your already like voice only flows and things like that, bringing it all together. And then the last theme is around emerging technology. So this is, not all of us have had the benefit of working on new technology yet. Some of us are just working on websites or phones. And I say just, there's a lot of complexity there. So whether you perceive like you feel like you want to catch up, or whether you're like, I want to see where the future's going, or you're just curious, there are a number of chapters that talk about all of the technologies we have available to us and how they work, how they can be used to include people instead of excluding people, and some of the really sort of cutting edge stuff in the back of the book, like AI and extended reality, and what's unique about working with those technologies. So there's two chapters, one dedicated to all of our input tech and one devoted to all of our output tech. And so for each of those input and output modalities I described, we talk about everything that's available. And for each of those input and output modalities, we talk about from exclusion to inclusion, like what the risks are and how we might go from excluding people with that modality to including people in some other way, either with that modality or another modality. And then with the sort of next generation technology chapters, we talk about like, what are the risks? What is unique and why might you choose these? And, you know, I thought it was really interesting in the extended reality chapter because I have an interview with virtual reality pioneer Jesse Schell, and he talks about some of the things that make design for virtual reality and extended reality unique, like the way the human brain works and processes space. So I thought that was, I learned a lot from working on that chapter and kind of what the different things that designers in that space are working with. And so those are the 4 big concepts I wrangled with in the book: the customer context and ethics, multimodal frameworks, ideation and execution, and emerging technology. But now let's get into some specifics, some stuff that you can like think about and maybe play with when you walk away. And I want to talk to you about the spectrum of multimodality. So from the Echo to automotive, from smartwatches to your television, not all multimodal experiences are created equal. Those things all feel very different. How do you choose the right interaction model? Like, how do you choose multimodal experiences on a TV feel fundamentally different from multimodal experiences on a computer or an Echo Show, but they all have a screen and voice and some form of touch interactions. Like, how did we choose which one made sense? And in my experience, 2 elements of your customer's context are all you really need to start understanding what's going to be most appropriate in the moment. Now, they may be changing appropriateness in the moment, right? Your customer's context may be changing. But I found that there's 2 primary dimensions. One of them is how much information your customer is looking for, like how rich is the information you're trying to transmit. You might have low information density, like what temperature is it? Very low information density, super easy, which would translate well to a smartwatch or a wearable potentially. High density, like books, audiobooks, or a full 10-day forecast, or something along those lines. The kind stuff you might see on a computer screen. The other dimension that drives kind of your multimodal interaction model choices is how close is the device to the customer, or how close is the customer to the device. So there's close proximity relationships, wearable to arm's reach. And then there's the long range relationships where the customer is typically 3 to 10 feet away from the device. Now, in some cases, the customer may be far away from the device itself, but is in close range to some form of proxy for the device, like a remote control. And so they can still interact with the device as if they're close to it, even if the processing unit itself is far away. But if you can explore your customer's context enough to understand these 2 questions, you can start to plot those things on a grid. And so here I've got proximity on the horizontal axis and information density of the scenario on the vertical axis. And you can place the experiences your customer is going to be seeking on this spectrum, and they'll typically land in one of these 4 categories. It is a spectrum, so in some cases you'll find it's a little bit of a gray area and you may have some discretion. But in general, you'll find that one of these 4 models is going to be best suited to your customer's scenarios. You might find that you have a bunch of scenarios and they cluster, and so one of them is really well suited to intangible, but most of them really look for an anchored scenario, so you're going to settle there. So let's dive in a little bit to what each of these mean. We have adaptive in quadrant 1, we have anchored in quadrant 2, we have direct experiences in quadrant 3, and intangible experiences in quadrant 4. So adaptive are like the Echo Show, and adaptive experiences allow customers to the flexibility of choice to choose the modality that makes the most sense in the moment. So the Echo Show lets us speak to it, but we can also touch it to extend our interactions. Anchored interactions, those are experiences with a rich physical presence where the customer is usually nearby. So that's like my desktop or like the Fire TV. A direct interaction model is where the customer and the device must be in direct contact or extreme proximity. So this is like your HoloLens, like the Oculus, or your Google Glass, your Fitbit, or your smartwatch. If you separate the customer and those devices, the interactions no longer have meaning. And then last but not least, the intangible quadrant are hands-free experiences where close proximity to device is not required. So, your Echo or your Google Home, for example. But how do you choose? You must understand your customer's context to know what interaction model makes sense in the moment. And that's why my first theme is all about that customer context and understanding what your customers need. The context matters. Where are they? What is around them? What devices are at arm's reach? Who's around them? How noisy is the space? How mobile are they? Do they have the flexibility of moving around? How volatile is their environment? All of those things influence which one of these models is going to make the most sense. If they're in a really volatile environment, odds are you're going to be trending more and more towards adaptive because they're going to want to choose in the moment what makes sense for them. Stable environments, maybe it's intangible or anchored. If they're moving all the time, but you don't have a lot of need for rich information, maybe you can get away with just doing something direct like a smartwatch. And when it comes to context, it's important to also remind ourselves that most of our assumptions about the way the world works have changed since March 2020. Office environments, education, public transit, travel, family gatherings. We all, in user research, had the benefit of making assumptions that no longer apply. For various reasons. And if you look at job listings, user research is seeing a resurgence because, largely of this reason. And, I think this will be good for multimodality because once we have all that extra context, we can start making more informed decisions about what else we could do with our experiences. You'll note that nowhere did I mention smartphones, and that's because they're difficult to classify. It kind of depends, to me, it depends on what type of content you're presenting, folks, because smartphones aren't great for every type of content. For productivity scenarios where you're looking at like a giant spreadsheet or a PowerPoint, to me, smartphones are really in the direct quadrant. They're short range with a constrained screen. They're not giving you a lot of information. And honestly, it's like looking at stuff through like a toilet paper tube. It's not great. But optimized experiences like gaming are going to feel more like anchored experiences where it feels richer because the amount of information feels appropriate to the device. And then voice-enabled apps like Alexa are pushing into adaptive. So smartphones are tricky. And so you can see it's context matters even here. To me, there is a point at which your information gets so rich that it causes it to feel constrained and makes your device experience feel like you're working in constraint even on a larger screen. But that's a little subjective. So which interaction models are right for you? Different tasks in your journey might lend themselves to different interaction models. So anchored interactions like Fire TV or a computer are best when you need to convey a lot of information. Now, a lot of information could be an HD film. There's a lot of information in a film, pixels and story and movement. Multimodality in these cases is largely useful as a shortcut for search and navigation. You see this all the time in set-top boxes and things like that, because it's really sort of time-consuming to browse and navigate through the world's entire content catalog. But if you know what you want, voice is a much more efficient way to get at those things. Adaptive experiences are the most inclusive because you can support multiple interaction modes at any time, potentially. But because you have so many possibilities, they are also the most expensive and complicated to work on. So they're not necessarily always the best option. If you have really simple needs and low information density, maybe adaptive is not necessarily the right choice. Most inclusive, most expensive, best when customer context is likely to change. That kitchen scenario for Echo Show and Google Home are really the best example. Like very volatile situation where like kids are running through, it's noisy, there's like butter everywhere. And so sometimes you're going to be willing to touch stuff and sometimes you're not. And sometimes you're going to be able to hear, the device is going to be able to hear you, and sometimes it's not. And so being able to choose in the moment is great. And because you can choose, that also gives people who are dealing with disabilities the ability to choose the interaction modality that makes the sense for them, regardless of timing or context. Direct interaction, best when you have a few key, often repeated tasks, playing music, making a quick call. You can often infer a bunch of information using sensors to eliminate the need for some interactions, but it's not well suited to text consumption or browsing stuff. And then intangibles, really well suited to questions, Q&A, stuff like that. What were the sports scores? What's the weather? Excellent for search scenarios, but really difficult in multi-user environments still. We have not figured out how to make voice work super well with like a bunch of family folks talking all at the same time. Maybe we'll get better at that someday, but we have not yet. So I want to give you a concrete example to think about how you might apply some of these different interaction models in the context of a single scenario. So let's think about, I can't get my brain off travel because I missed it. And we might have traveled had some of us been trying to come to this talk. So let's talk about a situation where your customers are planning and booking a big trip in advance, but they're not doing it from a single location. They're going from a commute to their homes. Now, a commute is a thing where you were at the workplace and then you were going to a home and there was like a distance between those things. Some folks are probably doing that right now. I am only just getting ready to go back to doing that. So let's talk about this scenario and how we choose like the right interaction model for the right context. I'm transitioning from past tense to present tense and commuting. I'm like hoping. I'm like in the transition mode. I'm like, oh, July 7th's coming fast. So let's talk about, so we're coming home from work, getting on a train or a bus, some kind of public transit. And in that context, direct makes a lot of sense. We're using a close range constrained UI on the mobile phone. Customer is browsing potential neighborhoods via a company website using touch controls on the small screen, and they're shortlisting some options during their commute. So, if we think about looking at hotels, you're not going to really get all the details you might get from a desktop site on a phone. At least it would be very time consuming to do so. So maybe this site is choosing what you get on the web, on the phone is a little bit streamlined. And so they're getting this direct experience. It's constrained. They're highlighting stuff they're going to look at later in more detail. Now, when they make the transition to home, we can make a couple choices as a company about how we want to allow our customers to interact. A more traditional model would be to move to an anchored interaction, close range, rich user interface. So maybe a couple is using a desktop or a laptop to browse the shortlist, using a laptop screen, a keyboard and trackpad or mouse to review additional details and make final selections. So, those two things, they're different ways of using the same interaction, the same multimodal interaction, which is, we've got visuals and we've got haptics. We're touching the screen, possibly using voice when we're back at home. But we could also do something a little bit more interesting if we go to adapt, if we decide to fold in some more forms of input and we do the adaptive experience down on the bottom, which is a long range with rich user interface. So we've got a family doing sort of group trip planning. So they're browsing the short list of resorts with the set-top box app, so on their smart TV, and the TV remote. So the parents are kind of driving the experience, they're using the remote, but the kids can ask questions verbally and see the answers on screen. So there's this element of being able to interact verbally as well as tangibly with the experience in the same context. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's this interesting, immersive family experience, which you don't see a ton of. And for families for whom the travel planning is part of the fun, this could be a real differentiator. And choosing this different interaction model gives us that new experience. Now, knowing whether this investment in the adaptive UI is worth it, we only get that information through customer context. Like, hopefully we'd have customer research that tells us we've got families who are doing this kind of collective planning or want to. We're like, hey, we're gonna, and they have smart speakers available. If we have all that information, maybe it's worth making this leap. Or you might come at it from the other angle and say, we've got people who need to do voice interaction with our app anyway because they have disabilities. What could we do with that to also turn it into a feature for other folks? So you could come at it from either angle and turn it into something that's kind of a differentiator. Now, how do you enable the transition between devices or modalities in this scenario? There are some other things. Some of these I mentioned in the traps chapter. Identity in transition. Your system's going to need a way to identify one customer from another. Hopefully your system already has that, but if you're building from scratch, it's important not to build that into the display layer and to have those conversations with development early, and to transition a user's presence between devices during a task. You want portable session context. You want to like persist like the search results and the favorites. You might want to save recent search, maybe not forever. And then flexibly structured content. You know, here we're making the assumption that what you see on the phone is sort of a cousin to what you see on the desktop. You see some of it, but not all of it. Ideally, in these environments, your content can adapt to multiple form factors and should limit the amount of detail displayed on constrained screens with appropriate. If you can have just like different content databases, but you save yourself so much pain if you think about it in advance and say like, how could we create one set of content that has like progressive disclosure on different platforms? There's a question about thickness of book. This is the book. Yeah. The book is fine there. Lots of pictures and things and tables, though. Lots and lots of tables for reference. So there's some complexity here, but it's worth it, particularly as we try to chart a path towards the final frontier. And you know, when we started working on mobile, it was complex. When we started working on voice speakers, it was complex. And as we move forward, the complexity, we start working that stuff out. We figure out what works and doesn't, and the rough edges smooth out quickly. I feel like we're at the same point here. We're going to figure out what works and what doesn't. And we are going to get to the point where we can agree on the best practices and then start working on even more interesting problems as we go. But we're in early days, and so we get to kind of define those best practices as a group, which is exciting. But multimodal flexibility isn't just about arbitrary choice, not just like, hey, I switched because I wanna. I mean, sometimes it is, but it's about inclusion. Like the more modes you support, the more people and scenarios you support. And so, you know, one of the points I made in another book I was interviewed for was multimodality isn't just, you know, a new feature play. It's a market play. Your customers are interacting with you with different modalities, even if you're not designing for them. They might be using screen readers or alternate forms of input that sort of transform haptic to some other form of input. But you're not controlling that experience for those customers. You could differentiate your experience by taking control, being intentional, and then opening that type of experience up to all of your customers. So last but not least, the last point I want to make is around putting it all together, a little bit about the big picture, because I've thrown a lot of concepts at you. And I just want to talk to you and make the point that like all the concepts that we've talked about fit together to give you an end-to-end process for multimodal and cross-device design. Not a new end-to-end process. Not telling you that there's some new way to do design. We are still starting with discovery and ending with the design we deliver, and we're doing iteration in the middle. But you know, it layers on top of the process you already have. But I felt it was really important. Like I didn't just want to come in and drop a bunch of definitions on you and call it a day, because like I've been through this a number of times, and like it was hard to ideate like with these new ideas. I wanted to talk to you about that part of the process in addition to the frameworks, like in addition to the discovery process. So there's content at every stage here. So there's content that talks to you about what to do in discovery to enhance your discovery if you want to work with multimodality and cross-device experiences. So the whole expanding how you capture customer context and how you turn that into choosing what part of the spectrum of multimodality you might align with. And I put that in discovery because you might also look at other pieces of the other experiences in the market while you're making some of those choices. If you're working on multimodal or cross-device experiences, you're probably going to want to evaluate the technology that's available to you as part of your sort of transition from discovery to iteration. And so there's a bunch of content there that gives you sort of the palette of tools you have to work with. There's a bunch of tools around envisioning and exploring and iterating. Those are the questions you need to ask yourself and your teams, tools for starting from a blank page, tools for asking yourself whether you should be working on the project in the first place. And there's also content that helps you in the delivery phase. So the really specific stuff that you're going to be asking yourself once you've all agreed that, yes, this is the right project. Yes, we're asking the right questions. Yes, we have the right frameworks in place. And now it's just getting the details in order. So working out transitions between modalities you've agreed on, working out notifications for events you've agreed on, and the ways you deliver your ideas and make them tangible and hand them off to the people who are going to make them a reality. As I tell folks outside the software industry, my hope is that this book will be the design manual for folks who want to design the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And like fun nerdy fact, when we're working on Rosenfeld books, they ask you to like give them a pitch that they hand off to the cover author. And that's basically kind of what I told them. Was like, here's, I was inspired by like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise because, on the Starship Enterprise, they can interact with voice. They can interact with touch, and not just like touch screens, but like physical controls. They're like pulling on levers sometimes. They're moving between like holograms at times. But they're speaking to things and they're doing it all seamlessly. Exactly, JB. Engage. And so like I'm very inspired by specifically the Star Trek Next Generation sort of experience, the LCARS interface, and that's kind of how we got to this design on the cover. And what's really funny is it took me a little while to realize the Easter egg on the cover, which is that they put Captain Picard on the cover. Look, he's right there. He's abstract, but he's there, and I love my nerdy cover, and I'm obsessed with it. So there's that. So Marie asks, does the book also include car like Tesla screens or into car applications? Definitely. I give a couple of examples from my work on Windows Automotive, which was pre-Tesla for sure, smaller screens, but I definitely talk about automotive experiences and the challenges of working on I think automotive's really interesting because when we talk about activities, like the things that customers are doing, it's really important for automotive because there's different attention, there's different cognitive loads in automotive you have to take into account that should change the way you interact with the user interface. That to me were a big part of what we talked about on Windows Automotive, what we talked about in Alexa notifications, because it eventually moved to automotive. So I do believe that while I don't do a case study on a Tesla, I do believe it's directly applicable, and I do bring a lot of my time on Windows Automotive to the examples in the book. So anyway, this is the vision I want is to provide this framework. These frameworks to help us get there, because to make such a seamless experience happen, there's a lot of decisions and happening under the hood there on the Starship Enterprise. And those are fun tasks for us as designers. This is a fun challenge. And I hope some of you will help us get to that vision someday. So someone's going to build this, and maybe it will be you. But whether you're working with new hardware or just simply adding new modes of interaction to make your website more accessible, I do believe there's something here for you, and I hope there's something here for you, and I hope you can make it so, and I hope you can engage. even if you have not purchased the book, I invite you to visit the book site online. There are some free downloads, guides, and templates. I've got a bunch of podcast interviews I've done linked. There are a couple of sample chapters you can go review, including the chapter on the spectrum of modality. And I forget if it's the proactive chapter. There's another chapter. So there's 2 chapters that are that are out there for free review. All of the images are over on Imager. So there's a lot of ways that folks can go and sample some of the concept. Loss and transition. Thank you, Alex. Points to you. Well done. So tons of stuff. There's like a mural template for the workshop I mentioned at the end of chapter 2. So there's all kinds of stuff you can take a look at. The link is also in the shared Google Doc that you're working on right now. And David Demov graciously posted the link in the chat for the book site. There is also, you can buy the book at rosenfeldmedia.com or your favorite online bookseller of any kind. But we do have a discount code at rosenfeldmedia.com until July 11th for folks who are participating in UX Salon. And at rosenfeldmedia.com, the print orders come with a free ebook, which is a pretty good deal because you know what? E-readers are better at search than print books. So having both is kind of nice. If you want a free signed book plate, you can send a name and mailing address to Cheryl@ideaplatz.com. I don't use your contact information for any other purpose. So now it's time for questions, and I'd love to just wish you all I hope you all have fun at the final frontier. And there's some of my social media contact information down there. Funny Godmother on Twitter. Also Funny Godmother on TikTok, but like you can't find, like my web profile is broken. I've been trying to get them to fix that for 6 months. So you got to look for me on the app. And Idea Platz on Twitter and Medium. Thank you all.
Okay, wow, Cheryl, that was amazing. So much stuff packed into, wow, almost an hour. Thank you for that. Okay, so anyone has a question, unshare so we can see the entire people.
Yeah, sounds good.
If you have a question, if you have a comment, if something you want to add.
I see one from Jamie about automotive, so I'm just going to take it. So Jamie asks, how do I feel about automotive companies having almost strictly a touch interface versus dials and knobs? Speaking from a cognitive load perspective, with the learning curve to learn their systems, but also it being a distraction and taking your eyes off the road to change settings. Soapbox time. Yeah, it's not my favorite. There's the thing that concerns me the most is I don't feel like there's enough guardrails in place to prevent people from bonking at the screen when we know that they're driving the car in situations of high cognitive load. Like if I am torquing the driver's wheel, like the steering wheel, driver's wheel, what am I new? The steering wheel, then I should not be, like, we should lock that thing out. If it's in reach of the driver, it should not be animating. I should not be interacting with it. Like if I'm on an on-ramp, there should not be any ability to interact with that thing during those periods. I don't think we're doing that. And Tesla in particular, they leaned into things like animations, like here, I'm going to show you like the air is circulating on this, like which vent. And that stuff is distracting and a little dangerous. The larger the map is and the more it's moving, that's more animation. It's drawing your eye away from the screen. And to your point around cognitive load, when we move to a touch screen, there's nothing to like, we can't just like throw our arm over here and hope that our hand hits the right physical control without looking. We have to look. And there are, in at least the United States, there are very specific guidelines for how long a single glance is supposed to be away from the road, 2 seconds. And the longest length of any, your eye is allowed to be away from the road for any single interaction, which is 12 seconds. So that's like 6 glances away from the road. But just because you can max that out doesn't mean you should. You know, like 12 seconds, a lot can happen in 12 seconds with your eyes away from the road, especially in bad conditions. So to me, the more we lean on these all glass cockpits, the more we are, we're cheating the system at the potential risk of human life. And there's a case study I talk about, which is not Tesla, but is a glass cockpit situation from an American aircraft carrier that resulted in a fatal loss of life. And like the loss of physical controls to tie to muscle memory can have a real and negative impact on human beings. So And I agree with you, Ash, that like conversational UX should be acceptable in cars. And it's actually really widespread. I think the number's like 1 in 2 people in the US uses conversational UX in their cars at least like once a month or something like that, or at least has access to it now. But that doesn't mean they're turning off the screens. And different people have different comfort levels, and honestly, different conversational UX experiences have different utility levels in cars. So Tesla is not my favorite when it comes to there's all glass cockpits, but I also haven't seen their like test results. I don't know, like maybe they're performing better than I know about with their eye tracking and their glance studies, but we had really high standards for that when we were working on Windows Automotive, and I certainly hope they're holding themselves to the same. So thank you for the excellent question.
Okay.
Let's see, scrolling back up again. Adaptive experience is most inclusive. Does it impair decision-making in someone who's literate? Illiterate is a really interesting question. And it's actually come up at my current, so I own my own company, Ideation, but I do also have a full-time job at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they have several investments with Mozilla on in Africa, trying to work with folks of limited literacy, trying to get voice interfaces out to folks like in farming communities. And we're only just starting to ask questions about that, like how, I don't think, if someone's, it's really interesting because I think if someone is dealing with low literacy, then it may be that you don't need adaptivity. Like it's tough because what is your user base? There's probably still going to be people who are unable to speak or are hearing impaired. And so the question is like, is it appropriate in those circumstances to create a fully adaptive system, or are you going to do a parallel system for those people to help compensate for them? I think you would need the context of how does that culture compensate for the folks in a culture where illiteracy is rampant for people who cannot speak. Like, what are those people more likely to read, and is there a different way we can communicate with them? Or that's a really tough challenge, but it's a really good question to be asking. Like, what you're doing is you're asking really good contextual questions, and there's no silver bullet answer. And so like follow that and say like, okay, does it impair decision making in someone who's illiterate? My question would be like, what are the conditions that would cause someone to change interaction modalities in a situation where there's there's either some or a lot of illiteracy, and how does that interact with accessibility concerns, and how does that influence like how we choose to support different modalities? We might choose to have parallel modalities. We might choose to have an adaptive one. You could have parallel modalities and say like one person's going to use a screen reader and one person's going to use a traditional experience, or you could have a truly adaptive system. But knowing context will help. But it's a really good question. Let's see, scrolling more to get some more questions.
It would be cool if people would come up on camera and ask their questions. But yeah, let's read the questions, or maybe.
I've got one in DM around what is your advice for bridging the communication gap between marketing UX teams? The concept are cohesive, aligned, appealing to stakeholders, but communicating this integration and implementation of comprehensive strategy seems to be a struggle for startups and mid-sized corporations. Well, I think, one big strategy that I have is building shared understanding as early as possible. And I talk a little bit about that in the Capturing Customer Context chapter in chapter 2. As much as possible, getting marketing to share what they know about their customers at the time you're starting discovery, and piling that all on the table up front to create shared buy-in so that it's not your knowledge versus their knowledge. It's you combined knowledge to start and came up with a shared body of questions that are interesting to you to start your inquiry. To me, building that shared understanding is key in a situation like this, and gives them a better line of sight to what we know and what we don't know. A situation I had run into a number of times is like, oh, we already know that about our customers. we already know this. And so like sitting people down for a couple of hours in a workshop where we come to people as experts, as I wouldn't say Trojan horse, but like, hey, we're starting customer research. We want to be really responsible, and you're an expert in this and such. So please come in the room. Please share what you know. And then as part of that, we go from what they know to talk about what we don't know. And we use the improv inspired framework I talk about to say like, explore like, what don't we know about their environment? What don't we know about their objective? What don't we know about their character? What don't we know about their relationships? And with the really complete set of potential questions, it's easier to say, hey, there are actually some things we don't know. So let's go and agree to explore these up front. And once we were all bought into that, then we can go a little bit, we can kind of take people along the whole journey instead of coming to marketing later on and saying like, we have this crazy idea and we would like you to market it. That is my key advice, is to get them in early, pull them in as experts, and bring them in as collaborators. Hopefully that's helpful and possible. Okay, and if it's a smaller startup or mid-sized company, hopefully that's easier too than at a big company.
Question from JB. And then we have a question from YouTube, but first JB. Unmute yourself. Let's say no.
Okay, now I'm allowed to. I was
Yes.
like, I'm trying. Okay, this is less a question and more, I'm going to put a topic forth and pray, frankly.
Okay.
I, for the first time the other day, asked for Alexa's pronouns. And I got like a really surprising non-answer. And I'm thinking about, in your book, you talk about that gender equity lens, and it's come up, when we talk about even how we style the vocalization of the device. But I was just it got me back on this idea of like, we've chosen a voice, that voice reads a certain way to the general population, and yet for some reason, they chose to write around the topic in their answer. I've turned mine off so I can't have it say it, but if you're muted and you want to try it, to me, that doesn't answer the question. And we all kind of naturally.
That's weird. Muted again.
I'm unmuted. Sorry, I don't know the last thing you heard, so I'll say I kind of lost my train of thought, but why would we write around that when, a lot of folks I know say she when talking about Alexa, Siri, stuff like that. I've read The Smart Wife, like that goes into it pretty deeply.
That's a
I'll just leave that topic with you because I'm curious about your perspective on it.
It's a great discussion topic, and thank you for bringing that example up. I wasn't on the Alexa team when they chose gender or the name of the product, but I was in on discussions where we would talk about like, okay, we know she's female. Like, do we intentionally like change the way we phrase sentences so it's not using traditional English, like feminine grammatical structures? But even then, there was this concern about creating like cognitive dissonance and its impact on market, right? Like on people welcoming it into their homes. And so you have this inherent tension between like doing what people feel is right and doing what the market feels is successful. And you see that too, like in early, and you kind of see this across all the assistants, not just Alexa, but like a reticence to have strong opinions on the smart assistants. Like, what do they like? What do they not like? Try asking them about political opinions. That's not going to go very far. I think it's really, but the gender pronouns thing, it's really interesting to me that they dodged that, because I know the voice designers there understand like the research out there about gender perception and voice. There's an excellent book I talk about all the time, Wired for Speech, and it talks about the way we perceive spoken interfaces, and our brains will not shut off our attempt to perceive gender. And so to just like pretend our brains aren't doing that is itself creating cognitive dissonance. To your point, you experience cognitive dissonance because you're like, my brain knows this is like female qualities, and you just basically lied to me. Like, but at the same time, in our culture, like there are people whose voices are not reflecting their chosen pronouns. Like they don't. So it could be that they've chosen that intentionally to create cognitive dissonance. And we don't know what their motivation is for doing that. So it could be like really good motivation, like we're going to lean against the stereotype and we're going to challenge it so that it doesn't have to be female. It could be that they just don't want to rock the boat. I don't know. But it's a really challenging, the gender perception thing is really challenging. And I know like JB's pointing out too, like people trying to get to like some form of genderless voice, text to speech, so people don't experience that. It's Google says it is okay. So that there's that. But it's really, and it's, I think to me too, this is why I think it's so important to do things like talk about the optipessimism, like think about the impact of your choices. Like what's the worst thing that could happen if we make this choice? Like what impact could it have if someone who is non-binary hears these choices? What is it, what are we modeling? What impact is it going to have if like kids hear this? What is it modeling? Are we modeling that it's bad to be making a particular pronoun choice? There's no good answer. They're really tough questions because we're basically designing for everyone. So like even just talking through it, I'm like, I don't know what the right answer is. I'm going to definitely like listen to it for myself, maybe write a Medium article about it once I think about it. But thank you for bringing it up because it's a super challenging issue.
Okay, so we have a question from YouTube. You see here in the chat from Daphna? Scroll up a bit.
From Daphna. Okay, yes. How does UI design differ between designing for a mobile or web and designing for AR or VR? Very interesting question, Hidayat. Hopefully I said that right. Hello, over on YouTube. So one of the biggest differences that we talk about in the book is, and I'm going to open the book to make sure I'm using the correct term, because Jesse had defined it as something very specific. This is why I love our little, this is the human AI chapter. This is, yeah. There's essentially, the human brain is perceiving presence. When we look at a 2D experience, we're not perceiving 3D space. And so there's like this whole level of dimension that just data that we don't have to deal with. But as a VR AR designer, the human brain reacts with greater affinity to physical environments it is more familiar with. And that it has like both short-term and long-term implications for VR designers, particularly VR designers. Augmented reality designers, the customer is kind of already familiar with the physical space because they're looking. Augmented reality, if you're not familiar with it, it's being projected. And mixed reality, those things are being projected on like the things we already see versus virtual reality, which replaces the things we already see. So virtual reality designers are sometimes trying to use the same physical layouts to trick the brain into thinking these are familiar places that you've seen before. To give you that, instead of just constantly showing you new layouts and just sort of keeping you off your game, unless that's their intention. If it's a game and they want you to feel lost, that's a good way to do it. There's when it comes to other considerations for AR and for augmented and mixed reality, those two things have a pretty restricted, at least currently, pretty restricted pixel and view area. And so the relationship between your content and the space is pretty complex. Understanding like where someone's looking, where the glance is, and you have a much more restricted input relationship with your content. Like the customer can't easily touch the things in the space. So you're dealing with much more indirect models like touch, and like speech, gesture, eye tracking, or at most maybe a clicker in their hand, especially for AR. So you're dealing with less direct interactions, especially for augmented and mixed reality, and that sense of place that you don't really have to deal with when you're on mobile. So those are the two big pieces. Hopefully that gives you some things to think about.
Okay, thank you. Neo is next. Say hi. Can you unmute yourself? Oops.
You're remuted.
Yeah, now it's working.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, name is Neo from the Matrix. It's actually a South African name. It means gift in our language. So I just wanted to find out, on the minimum viable product, conundrum that we sit with, right? We deal with difficult stakeholders, and often we deal with out of the box functionalities from cloud-based products that we offer within our organization. So we struggle considerably with the minimum viable product problem. Often our users, stakeholders are not happy with the functionality that's there. It's not intuitive. And because they're exposed to so much with WhatsApp and all these apps that they're using, Facebook and so on, it's very difficult. So what we've been doing a lot of prototyping, but it's still not helping. Our developers are trying to do the UI designs and so on and try to have that shared understanding that you talk about. We tried using the personas and try to understand our stakeholders, but still we're not winning. We're doing our best. I just wanted to find out, how does, what you're talking about now with modalities and so on, and from your perspective, what could we do from a UX perspective to sort of win them over from a minimum viable product perspective, because we do have product limitations in the products or the applications that we're offering our stakeholders. How would we use UX to sort of bridge that gap? Yeah.
The next step for me, if you have not already had the accessibility conversation as like an extension of market, might be my next play if you've not already had it, and apologies if you already have. But in many cases, past organizations I've been with kind of view it as a tax, but you can expand the number of people. You start out by saying, like, we've already got this market we have to address. You may, and different countries have different legal restrictions, but in the United States, like we are required in many cases to provide experiences for accessible customers, but for customers who need accessibility. But if we have to do that anyway, if we do that in a way, if we spend that development money in a way that also benefits our other customers and can be marketed and used as a way to draw in customers, then it's a better stewardship play. It's a better use of our company's money and investment, both to benefit the customers who need that accessibility functionality, but to also benefit all of our other customers. To me, and we didn't get this feature up and running, but because I had left before I could kind of land this feature. But for me, when I was working on Power Apps, one thing I was passionate about was we were talking about a conversational agent for creating a Power App. Like, it took so many clicks to go and say, like, I want this grid here, and I want this detail view here, and I want this thing hooked up to this thing. And I was like, why can't I just tell a bot that I want a grid on the left, and I want a detail view up top, and I want it hooked up to this table? It would take me like 3 lines of text instead of all these clicks and digging through UI and finding things. And it wouldn't just help people who are maybe trying to cope with a screen reader, would help anybody because it's just faster. We also, I don't know whether part of your work has been like doing any feasibility or desirability studies on any of these interaction modalities. But if you have not, that would be part of it. Like, we, on the Echo, look, it cost $6 million to add speech to that product. And we were ready to we were very ready to just cut speech because, like, our stakeholders were like, that is too much money. We could just use mobile. And we had to run studies, and I had to design studies that set it up so that mobile seemed like the default, seemed like the easiest way to do things, and burden of proof was on voice, and people still said that they wouldn't buy the product without the voice. It doesn't sound like your product is in that big a dilemma. Obviously, they're using their product potentially without new modality, but there may be an opportunity to like make an expansion of market play and combine that with desirability research if you don't already have it. That would be my next step. And apologies if that's an avenue you've already explored.
Okay, thank you, Neo. Ralph, you're up next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now it works, yes.
Oh, thanks, Avi. Cheryl, thank you for this. This has been such an informative webinar. I'm really charged up, especially your comment about the designing the bridge for the Starship Enterprise. I come from a 3D design background, and I'm currently finishing up a UX design course. So all of this is all completely new to me, especially hearing what you're talking about today. It's pretty energizing. So my question for you is, I'm going to begin my job search very soon. So I'm wondering if I should focus my search for positions that have this multimodal
the video froze.
component to them. My video froze?
Oh, it's picked back up again.
Oh, sorry. So did my voice come through?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, would that make sense for someone like me to be so focused on a position like this right away, or should I kind of take a position that will get my foot in the door and then maybe grow into that later?
It's a great question, and I would actually say the latter. I would say find a role that's going to help give you a portfolio and a basis. And here's 2 reasons. One is I feel like my book is at the cutting edge, right? Like we're at there are companies that are still, as Neo's question kind of raised, there are a number of companies that are still grappling with this. So they're not necessarily going to be hiring for this. And if they do, it's probably at a leadership level. And even then, as someone who's like talking to folks at a leadership level, that's still pretty far between. But the other thing is I have watched people come in at an entry level into cutting edge roles, especially ones that deal with things like this. And the problem with them is they're usually secret projects with long development times. Mm-hmm. And those projects can get canceled very easily. And that limits your ability to change jobs if you are in a situation where you're like in a toxic team or you're abused. You could end up coming out 2 years later with no portfolio material, and you're competing against people who you're no longer qualified as like an entry-level candidate. So you're competing against mid-career folks. And I hate to see that happen. And so like I had this whole article on Medium about like down the rabbit hole, like my experience working on the Echo Look, which was like totally tented, like 30 people on Amazon knew about it. And like, I generally advise like avoiding secret projects early in your career because you're putting so many of your eggs in baskets you don't control. And I watch so many people trying to get hired off of projects from school, and all the projects from school look the same, and I can see how hard it is for them. And so if you find one that's like speaks to you and you're willing to take that chance, go for it. Like it may be, but know that you may need to also like work projects put together like skunkworks projects on the side to compensate, especially if that project were to get canceled or postponed or something like that. And I'm particularly sensitive to toxic work environments because my first jobs were at Electronic Arts, which got sued twice during my time there for abusing its employees. So I'm all about like keeping your portfolio in a state where you can walk away if you have to.
Great point. Best
of luck on the journey.
Thank you so much.
You're off, and now we're next question, last question, because we're running out of time, for Greta. And then we're going to go to the networking session and breakout rooms. So, hi, Greta.
Hello. Thank you for an amazing session. So I have a couple of follow-up questions for the question that was before. So I have 2 questions, basically. So what to do with your portfolio if you are working on non-disclosure agreement? So basically, if you have projects you cannot share, so maybe depersonalize those projects or something like that. And another one, how to make your portfolio stand out in like this crazy market.
Great questions. Yeah, the non-disclosure one is tough. I have depersonalized at times, and I will talk about like the types of things I have learned or learned to do on a particular project. It can be very difficult. Like I could not depersonalize my notifications work because people knew I worked at Amazon on voice, and if I said I was designing a notifications framework, it would have hit like, you know, it would have hit Gizmodo. So I was stuck. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, which is again why I'm like, sometimes you just don't want to be on the secret stuff, because I couldn't talk about that for 3 years. I was so excited when they finally announced it, or 2 years, 2 or 3 years. But talking about the types of problems you solved, maybe abstracting wireframes, but at least talking about what you've learned. And you'd be surprised, I got hired back at Microsoft with the same portfolio I had when I left at like a noticeably higher salary. So sometimes mid-career, you don't necessarily need to amp up the portfolio just as much as like, you know, maybe enhance the case studies and polish them and things like that. Now, making the portfolio stand out, I've been working on this myself because all portfolios continue to evolve. And I would say, craft, I try not to discriminate based on like quality of text, but have someone proofread your case studies, because people do make rash judgments based on the quality of the text. Whether or not people are trying to be inclusive, sometimes it happens. I'm experimenting with having different ways to browse through my portfolio. Like ask yourself what types of questions the hiring manager is going to ask when they come to your portfolio. I don't think it's super effective to just list the projects. Like just putting pictures of logos isn't answering the question a hiring manager is asking. So I'm experimenting at the top of my portfolio, which you can see at portfolio.cherylplatz.com. You know, like here's the industries that I've worked in. Here's some of the top skills I have. You know, and so some hiring managers are going to come in looking for their industry. Some hiring managers are going to come in looking for a technology. And hopefully that way I'm organizing my portfolio in a way that'll match a couple of different hiring managers' perspectives. And then on the homepage, I use it to highlight specific case studies that I think are of particular interest. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. It does.
Thank you, Greta. And okay, Cheryl, wow. That was amazing. A lot of stuff in 1.5 hour packed. Thank you for your time on this. You're welcome to stay if you are not busy for the networking. We're going to break out into small groups. In the past, it was fun. People get to know each other and kind of chat. So everyone else is welcome to stay as well. And we're going to break out for 15 minutes. Just introduce yourself, say where you're from, why you're here, you know, and get the conversation going. So thank you again, Cheryl, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Type a plus when you like. This is the clapping when you plus. So yes.
You can find me on social media. I'm easy to find.
Yes. Okay. So thanks. So I'm going to break up. Let's see how many people stay in a minute. Are you going to stay, Cheryl, or are you going?
I can stay a couple minutes. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. That's cool.